So there's a new Batman cartoon, and it's worthy of some discussion. Partly because of the way the show came to be, but also because it's another strong example of the artistic vandalization that's killing Hollywood. But even more than all that, it's just a really crappy Batman show. The original 90s Batman cartoon remains one of my favorite animated series of all time. It created now iconic characters like Harley Quinn, who was canonized into the comics and remains a key character in the DC slate. And then there's Kevin Conroy. His 30-year reign as the best performer of Bruce Wayne and Batman is a crown he will posthumously carry for the foreseeable future. To be honest, I don't think it'll ever be challenged. Given my love for the original animated series, it's not hard to understand why this new iteration would irk me so strongly. But to appreciate the totality of the dumpster fire that is Batman the Caped Crusader, we have to go all the way back to 2019, a time when AT&T still owned Warner Brothers. The telecom was desperate to turn things around at a studio that was drowning in debt. One of the big ideas was to sign J.J. Abrams and his production company Bad Robot to a multi-project deal worth some $250 million. Since then, despite a few attempts, none of Abrams' projects have quite gotten off the ground, save for one, Batman the Caped Crusader. On paper, this show had some promise. Warner Brothers brought in Matt Reeves, who directed the generally respected 2022 film The Batman as an executive producer, as well as Bruce Timm, who was a huge part of the original series. But potential and names don't mean much by themselves, and in this case, they don't account for much of anything at all. Batman the Caped Crusader started experiencing problems very early on. A year after the full season was ordered, AT&T sold Warner Brothers again to Discovery. The new boss, David Zaslav, came out of the gate making changes and cuts. One of the cuts was the Caped Crusader. In a clear sign of how little confidence they had in the project, Warner Brothers decided not to move forward with the series, but instead shopped it around for another buyer. Enter Lindsay Weber and Amazon Prime, who decided to pick up the show. In March of 2023, Amazon not only took over, but decided to produce 2 seasons instead of just 1. Finally, on August 1st of this year, Amazon Prime dropped the whole first season at once, and now it's clear why Zaslav passed on the project. It's also impossible to deny that J.J. Abrams has really lost his creative magic, though there's some debate about whether he ever had it to begin with. Batman the Caped Crusader is a miserable excuse for a Batman show, lacking in originality or substance. Plots don't make sense and rely on contrivances and forced messaging to carry episodes. But I'll get to that. First, I'm going to start with the most glaring issue: the characters. While the Caped Crusader attempts to utilize several stable characters from the Batman universe, it doesn't do much with them, and it doesn't even seem to understand them. At best, the characters are hollowed out husks of their counterparts in other media. But what really hampers them is the feminist DEI propaganda. All the male characters in this show are inept, corrupt, or just jerks. For instance, Harvey Bullock is a detective in the Gotham PD. In the original animated show, Bullock had a hard edge to him. He was unfriendly and antagonistic, but he was consistently honest, capable, and smart. So of course, in the first episode of Caped Crusader, we find Bullock is on the take. Later episodes show him as an unprincipled chauvinist with no regard for police procedure. For no discernible reason, they've destroyed Bullock and turned him into just another bent cop. Actually, most of the police officers in this show are portrayed in a bad light, and I think Batman may spend more time fighting cops than he does criminals. In this version, Harvey Dent is an arrogant, sleazy politician, more interested in his mayoral campaign than actually doing his job as DA. And when he actually turns into Two-Face, well, let's just say they waste every opportunity to do anything worthwhile with him. Commissioner Gordon gets off a little better. He is at least honest and well-intentioned, but he is also hapless and in over his head most of the time, rendering him ineffective and in constant need of help from female characters like Barbara Gordon and Renee Montoya. In fact, in Season 1, Gordon isn't the one who builds a working relationship with Batman. Barbara is. Again, all the male characters in Caped Crusader are portrayed as either weak and useless, or as compromised jackasses, while all the female characters, on the other hand, are all girl bosses, strong, capable, and always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Even Bruce Wayne and Batman are not spared. Bruce comes off as an opportunistic, self-serving elitist. Alfred is constantly chiding him for his lack of empathy. His Batman is likewise an emotionless husk that goes through the motions of the character without any of the depth. And the villains don't fare much better. We get a gender-swapped Penguin, who aside from being made into a flamboyant flapper, was also apparently inspired by Harvey Fierstein. Yes, they turned Penguin into an overweight woman who was inspired by a gay man. None of the other villains are done justice either. Harley Quinn isn't the side girl of the Joker anymore, but an overzealous psychiatrist who kidnaps and uses brutal conditioning tactics to break rich clients she believes have used their positions of wealth and power to abuse others. And as you might expect, she's one of the few that gets away without paying much of a price for her actions. Firebug, however, isn't so fortunate. Brought in by a couple corrupt cops in a bid to draw out Batman so they can arrest him. But when the plan doesn't work, The cops shoot Firebug dead to cover for themselves. This leads me to another big problem with the show. Tonally, it is far darker than other cartoon iterations. It has a high body count across its first 10-episode season. The deaths are rarely treated with any weight. In the first episode, Batman fights some thugs in a warehouse. As he runs outside to chase one of them, the building he just left is leveled by an explosion, presumably killing the half-dozen men Batman just knocked out. However, this is never brought up, referenced, or dealt with later in the episode. Shootouts, stabbings, and other forms of violence play out likewise with little regard to the actual cost of the violence being portrayed. It seems to be aimed at an older audience, given that it carries a TV-14 rating, but given its utter lack of substance and disregard for several classic characters, I don't see it playing very well. Actually, I'm not sure who this was made for at all. The show wastes time in elements that just don't matter, like developing a burgeoning relationship between Harleen Quinzel and Renee Montoya, which ends up going nowhere. At the same time, it flies through exposition. Characters just kind of show up when and where they need to for plot to happen, and the stories revolve far too quickly for anything to feel achieved. And then there's the dialogue and acting, which ranges from bland to bad. There's no standout performances, and most of the line deliveries are just flat, as if the actors are reading straight from a page with little or no emotion at all.
I knew you'd come for me.
He'll talk about his escape.
Not my fault he wouldn't take a deal.
Worst of these is Batman himself, whose voice actor, Hamish Linklater, mistakes blank and emotionless for stoic.
You falsified the reports. Who paid you?
The Caped Crusader is another prime example of what happens when a creative project with years of rich history is bastardized by a big studio bereft of true talent. The Ravagers who made Caped Crusader want to mine the Batman IP for recognizable characters that fans are invested in, and then use them for a bad fan fiction intended to earn ESG points and a pat on the back from progressive organizations like GLAAD. Even Bruce Timm, who is responsible for some of the best storytelling in the Batman animated universe, now seems more interested in winning political points, hoping if he genuflects at the altar of progressive modernity, he'll be spared cancellation and be allowed to keep working in Hollywood. Now I know that some of you may claim that I just decided to hate on this show because it's different, that I made up my mind not to like it before I even saw it. Well, there is another Batman cartoon that at one time I initially thought I wouldn't like. In 1999, Warner Brothers announced a new Batman show that would be set in the future, featuring an elderly Bruce Wayne who had long since retired from being Batman, and a new youthful character who would take up the mantle. At its announcement, I didn't like Batman Beyond very much. The futuristic setting seemed like a gimmick, and I hated the idea of a new Batman. I mean, Bruce Wayne is Batman. There couldn't be anyone else. But then the show came out. Warner Brothers gave this Saturday morning cartoon a 1-hour primetime premiere, and I gave it a try. Despite my negative opinions going in, I found Batman Beyond was handled with more care and consideration than I expected, and during its first season the show won me over to become a version of Batman I still enjoy. All that to say, I am willing to be proven wrong. I am willing to change my opinion when a show defies my expectations and turns out to be something special. Unfortunately, Caped Crusader is not one of those shows. It is far less, and a casualty of the modern audience virus that has seemingly infected everything. Seriously, skip this show and watch the 90s series instead. It still holds up and is far more deserving of your time, whether it's your first time watching it or your 50th. But remember, this is all just one rebel's opinion. What do you think? Have you watched Caped Crusader? How do you think it measures up to the other animated series? Let me know in the comments. If you appreciated this commentary, leave a like, and consider subscribing to the channel so you'll always get the latest updates on Rebel Normal.